I want to take this time to introduce our next guest for this next hour of this segment. Pasta, we scheduled for an hour, but just like I said, Jimmy and Sabby, I'm not going to kick you off. Just let me know when you're.
I'm good to 2:30. So
all right, good, good. I'll send you off then. But let's get Caleb in here and Tara Reed. I appreciate you guys for joining us.
Caleb,
Hey, how are you?
good to see you. Long time, right?
Yeah, good to be here with everybody. With
Been a couple
Nick,
weeks.
with Pasta, with Tara. Wow, this is great.
Hey
An
there.
Anti-Imperialist Summit. Excellent.
Yeah,
Hi,
welcome.
Tara.
Hi, it's good to see you. I'm trying to get my camera to work. Sorry.
Yeah. No worry. All right, maybe just refresh and we get that to work. But that's why I always love doing these summits because I just like bringing the community together and we can start educating people. And since we got Caleb in here, we're talking about how the media manufacturers consent towards war. Before we get into that, I actually kind of want to ask you about something breaking, if you don't mind, because I saw we were talking about how the media cracked down on dissidents, people who debunk mainstream propaganda. So you can share as much as you want, but I saw that your PayPal was taken down, and this is not the first time I've seen them go after you. We were talking about Elon Musk and Twitter earlier. One big test for Elon, if I see if he's the real deal, if you start taking that Russia affiliated media, and they tag that on you to discredit you as well. So do you want to speak on the recent happening of the PayPal and that? I'm going to pass it to you. I think that's a good way we get started and we move on.
Well, sure. I mean, I just got an email on Thursday that said that I may no longer use PayPal. And I have money in my PayPal account that is frozen, that I cannot withdraw from it. They said in 180 days, they'll get back to me about my money. That's pretty ridiculous. And this shows that this war around the world, this economic war against Russia, against China, against Venezuela, against Iran, is also a war against journalists and independent voices and political analysts in the United States that challenge the status quo, right? Because at the end of the day, with all this talk about disinformation and information laundering, blah, 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 they're not worried about Russia. They're not worried about China. They're worried about you. They're worried about Americans who think wrong, who don't obey what our great overlords and Silicon Valley fascists tell us what to think. That's what they're worried about. And that's why they got crazy Nina singing her stupid Mary Poppins song. And that's what all of this is about. They are panicking because too many people are doing what the audience of this show right now are doing and thinking for themselves and questioning authority and digging into the facts and looking up the information. And the technological revolution, the fact that people pull out their phones and Google search things and look for information, that scares them because it threatens their ability to craft discourse. If they want to start a new war, if they want to drive down living standards, they have to be able to convince people it's a good thing. And they don't want people to be able to question that. And so I've been targeted by that. It says Russian state affiliated media on my Twitter. And that particularly, that's particularly bullshit, right? So I do work at RT. I'm proud of the work that I do at RT. RT is a Russian company. But that's not my whole life. When I stream on YouTube, nobody in Russia is helping me produce those streams. Nobody in Russia is telling me what to say on those streams. When I tweet on my personal Twitter that is not verified and is not connected to RT in any way, no one's calling me up and telling me what to tweet. No one's calling me up and saying, tweet this, tweet that. I'm me. I'm an Irish American. I'm from Ohio, from a small town. Nobody in my family is Russian. I don't speak Russian at all, basically. I think I know like Niet and Vada is Wada. That's about it. When I go over there, I have to have translators the whole time because I don't even know.
I read articles. It's a mess, man. I'm horrible with Russian names.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm not a Russian bot. I'm a guy who happens to work at a Russian company. And even in my work with RT, I would never report anything that I thought was false. I always investigate and look into whether or not things are true. We try to, make sure we do our stories in an unbiased way. And the reality is that RT is held to a higher standard than mainstream media. If CNN makes a mistake, no one ever talks about it. They just kind of sweep it under the rug. If RT makes a mistake, it's immediately all over everywhere. Look, that's Russian propaganda. Don't believe anything they say. So we're actually held to a higher standard. I would say what you see on RT is more accurate than what you see on mainstream media. So this whole hysteria, they're not actually pointing to anything that I've ever said that's false, to anything that RT has ever said that's false, to anything Mint Press News. They got their PayPal shut down. Also Mint Press, they said it's false. They just say, well, we don't like the narrative you have. We don't like the editorial perspective. Well, I'm sorry. You're allowed to have whatever editorial perspective you want, right? In the United States, we're supposed to have freedom of speech, freedom of the press. And if I have an editorial perspective that's about space aliens, or it's about Jupiter or Venus, or it's about reptile people, or about whatever, right? I'm allowed to do that, and you're not allowed to shut me down because of my editorial perspective. And my perspective is that I'm an anti-imperialist. I think that capitalism, a system of production organized for profit, is the problem, and that we need a new society where the people come first, not the profits of a few banks and corporations. And I think that countries around the world that have broken free from that system, Russia, China, Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, countries like that are a great example of what can be done when you break with this global monopolistic capitalist system that has been set up by the West. So that's my perspective. And yes, I'm going to bring my perspective with me. When I report for news, I try to be completely unbiased. When I'm given op-eds, I am going to give my perspective and my opinion, but I have just as much as right to do that as anybody else. And, the fact that they're trying to label me a Russian state affiliated media. Don't believe anything that guy says. Whatever he says, don't believe it. Look at the tag on his Twitter. Everything he says is therefore false. Well, I got news for you all. Just because someone in Russia or linked to Russia or who works at a Russian company says something doesn't mean it's false. People can say true things even if you don't like somebody that they're connected to. Very bad people can say true things. All kinds of people can say true things. This is a classic logical non sequitur. This is Twitter engaging in illogic and propaganda to try and shut down dissident voices. And I hope Elon Musk will fix that. I'm waiting on Elon Musk to come in and remove these tags because he's a Mr. Free Speech, right? And he's running Twitter now. So we'll see.
Well, hold your breath there, Caleb, too, because it ain't going to happen. These are the things some of us said in the Black Pill group for a while right now. And I'm kind of like in between you guys and what my group, it's Steve from Slow News Day and all those guys, like they're over there. And you guys, I have this big like anti-imperialist socialist kind of mentality that I still kind of cling to because I was able to go overseas and see that with you. But the one thing I want to point out that you said is very, very important. And Caleb hit this right on the nose, and I've been saying this for quite some time now when I noticed it. The greatest threat to the American empire is not Russia. It's not China. It's not any other country. It's us. It's us. We are the greatest threat to the empire. That's why they're doing everything they can to silence us, shut us up, and whatnot. And also the last point I want to make too real quick, and I'll hand it right back over to you, Nick, is that this isn't big tech. This is the government. The government works in conjunction with big tech. Jen Psaki, how many times does she have to say that we're checking with other companies across the board to see how they censor people? How many whistleblowers do we need? This is what the true definition of fascism is. It's the merger of corporation and state. And there's no place it's more evident than in our news because we don't have mainstream media news. We have mainstream media propaganda. We're the news and we have to fight them.
Yeah, and it's one unified, coordinated message. And no matter
they're synchronized.
Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, this beef that you guys think they have, these petty squabbles.
Yeah.
And you see when it comes to Ukraine, Russia, when it comes to any big foreign policy, they move in lockstep. And now you see big tech, and I love that you brought up the term fascism. You're not afraid you call it what it is because this has been a long time understanding the merger between corporation and state. You got big tech, and they even admit it. The funny thing is they'll say, "Yeah, we met with Congress and we listened to their proposals. Now we're going to implement it." So you met our government in Congress that gave you demands, and you immediately start implementing those demands. How is that not as crazy as anything you guys suggest, quote unquote, authoritarian countries has done? I would love to you guys take on that, but before I do that, I want to introduce Tara. Are you ready, Tara? Give me a thumbs up if you are good to go. I think we finally got your tech issues figured out. Welcome to
Hey, hi. Hi there. I have a webcam because for some reason my computer cam won't work. So if I look a little blown out, that's why. Hi.
Yeah, it's always good to have you on. Welcome.
Yeah. So to everything you're saying, it's right on. The Ministry of Truth is pretty scary, right? Someone who just didn't do well in musical theater is now going to decide what's misinformation.
Should we watch the video?
We should.
I told you about it not too long ago, so it shouldn't be too hard to pull up. I just tweeted in response like this person. My first reaction to it, like, man, these people are fucking Like, this is a South Park character. Here, I found it. So let's watch the video. I'm gonna start with Tara because I want to get her in, and then I'm gonna give you guys response individually. This is the person who is the arbiter of truth, who is gonna decide what is misinformation and what is not. So let's check it out.
Mongering is really quite ferocious. It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origins are slightly less atrocious. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. When Rudy Giuliani shared that intel from Ukraine, or when TikTok influencers say COVID can cause pain, they're laundering disinfo, and we really should take note and not support their lies with our wallet, voice, or vote. Oh, information laundering is really quite ferocious. It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origin seems slightly less atrocious.
Probably one of the hardest 45 seconds that we ever had on.
Yeah, she wants to be on Broadway, but she ended up being a bureaucrat in a windowless building at Homeland Security. So feel her pain and know that each one of us will be monitored, especially Caleb, right? Because he's labeled. But yeah, scary. But I mean, they're couching it in this, I don't know, entertainment, I guess. But it's really frightening, actually, that the government is going to decide what's disinformation. And when I saw Caleb's post about PayPal, I mean, they're going after private American citizens. Caleb is an American citizen living in New York City. How is he lost access to his money? How is that legal in any shape or form? And did they send you any message, Caleb, or what triggered it? Or
I screenshotted it and tweeted it out. It said, after reviewing, we've determined that your account may be risky. It's the exact same message that Mint Press got. It's the exact same message that others got who were shut down on the same day.
Here's the
your account may be risky.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it took so long for them to catch up to you, because I've always said that he's a common sense communist of sort, Caleb Maupin. He doesn't, believe in cancel culture and pushing people out. Your whole organization is about bringing people into the fold and talking to them. And you don't demean people on the other side. And when you have a person like that, and I'm not comparing you, but that is the spirit of the Rainbow Coalition from Fred Hampton and whatnot. You're then dangerous. You know what I'm saying? And I'm surprised it took them this long to catch up to you, to be honest with you, Caleb, because you've always been that person. So for me, it was just a matter of time. I was like, they're going to get him eventually. They're going to take him down, especially now with this whole Russian purge. You know what I'm saying? They're losing the propaganda battle of what's going on over there. When you watch RT on Odyssey or wherever they're at right now, they're actually on the front lines talking about Ukraine and showing you what's going on. When you're watching MSNBC, they're just two people in a room talking, giving you the propaganda pieces and whatnot.
Right.
So I know a great purge was coming, and I said they're gonna get Caleb because he's part of that whole crew, and he was getting more and more popular, more people watching your stuff. And this is the way they kneecap people. We've been demonetized on YouTube, the Convo Couch, for 15 months. And it wasn't the advertisement money, it was the super chats. 90% of our money came in from people going, hey, let me give you a few bucks. The fact that they removed that mechanism, once again, how could that be legal? How can you not call that fascism? How can you not push back against that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. And, it's shocking, actually. And remember, I don't know if I shared this with you all. I had, back in the day when I was an expert witness for domestic violence, I was trained by Homeland Security to do domestic violence prevention and train the trainer to train whatever. This agency, Homeland Security, is not a friendly one. Okay, this is their law. They are with law enforcement. They are going after people. So this ministry of truth, if you will, or a ministry of lies, depending on which side of it you're on, right? It's going to be taking away civil liberties. It's going to be taking away people's rights. And one of the mechanisms they're going to use, and I think they're testing it out right now, is blocking people from their funds. So it's PayPal and Venmo right now, but what happens when it's the bank accounts as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know? And now, Caleb, I was researching this, and I guess you can only do arbitration against PayPal. You can't sue them. Is that right?
I
Nobody
am
can sue
told
them?
that I have to wait 180 days and then they'll get back to
180
me.
days.
So yeah, I mean, you know, I've got some money frozen there, and in 180 days, I'll be getting an email from them about what can be done with it, which is interesting. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild. It's absolutely wild. I have looked into a number of the free speech alternatives to PayPal, which is interesting. But you know, it is interesting. You know, for a long time, I banked with Chase because that was the main bank, and in 2014, you know, every employee, I was at that point working with Press TV from Iran. Every employee got a letter in the mail. You're no longer welcome to bank with Chase. So I don't bank with Chase anymore. And so, yeah, they are doing it to banks. They did that back in 2014. And the crazy thing, they did it to my wife too. And my wife doesn't have anything to do with Press TV. She's never been on it. She has nothing to do with it. She just happened to be married to me. But every person who worked with Press TV in any capacity got a letter. You're no longer welcome to bank with Chase. You know, like the relatives, you know, the company, like the studio production company that worked with Press TV, they also got a letter. So they were banned. And all of the relatives of the guy who owned the studio production company, they all got letters in the mail. It was like completely ridiculous. You can't bank with Chase anymore. Now, I mean, that doesn't apply to every bank that ever existed. But, you know, I mean, that was pretty wild to be told basically, you got 30 days to get your money out of our bank, and we will no longer do business with you. That was really, really scary. Yeah, I mean, and this is what they're doing. They're sanctioning individuals.
Yeah, when I was working for, you know, RT, same thing. When I did op-eds for RT as a contractor or whatever, you know, the banks were very clear. They're like, you can't accept, you know, KeyBank. I don't, you know, was one of them that rejected. And it's like, so some of the banks are still working and some aren't. And it's interesting that the government has this much control over the banking industry. We kind of knew it, but now we really know it. And now we're seeing examples of people not having access to their funds. I mean, Caleb, you have a family, you have to pay rent. You live in New York City, which is very expensive. I mean, I can't imagine the hardship this is for all the people involved.
Can I say something real quick, though?
Go ahead.
Think it's and it's just really quick, Caleb, I'll jump in. I don't think the government has control of the banking system, Tara. I think the banking system has control of the government.
There you go, Pasta. Okay.
I just want to point that out, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Caleb.
Well, part of the reason we have antitrust legislation in the United States is because this kind of thing is bad for the market, right? I mean, think about it. Now, you know, we have public utilities, electricity, but imagine that the power company was in bed with a computer company. And that computer company didn't like some rival computer company. So they called up the power company that was in bed with them and said, hey, can you turn off the electricity for that computer company? Well, that kind of thing used to happen like in the 19-teens, right? And that's why we passed all these laws around public utilities that no, you can't do that, right? If you're a public utility, you have to give the same service to everybody. We also passed antitrust legislation. So, for example, you know, if you own a Hollywood studio, you can't own movie theaters. Why is that? Well, that's because if you owned a Hollywood studio and movie theaters, your theaters would only show your movies. And so pretty soon you'd have a monopoly. And there's all kinds of mechanisms to prevent the kind of thing that we're seeing from the tech giants happen. They were created to prevent this just for the good of the market. It wasn't about free speech. It wasn't about protecting people's rights. It's that if you concentrate this much power and you give big corporations the ability to not do business with this person and do business with that person and shut people down for this reason, pretty soon you have a really concentrated monopoly with all the wealth concentrated in a few hands. And then the economy comes to a grinding halt. It's called monopolistic stagnation. So, you know, this is ultimately bad for the market, what they're doing. It's not just bad for people like me.
You know, there's something interesting that's happening, and I'm wondering, where are we going to go from here? And I'd like, you know, I was wondering what you all think of that, because we're seeing like within 3 days, the PayPal thing happened where a bunch of journalists had that cut off Mint Press. Then you had the, you know, Ministry of Truth emerge. Then you had the Daily Beast that not just did a hit article on one journalist, but went ahead and just went after 5 or 6, right? In one piece, right? And like went for gold, right? And then just went after all the investigative journalists that aren't pushing the narrative and talking points of Biden administration. So what do you think is the next horrible thing that we're moving towards?
Go ahead, take it on, Pasta.
Well, good. I was going to say what we got to do to combat it, right? And that's what we're doing right now. You know, there's a lot of like, I don't necessarily agree with everything that Nick says. You know, I agree with most of what he says, but, you know, that doesn't make a difference. I'm going to still collaborate with him. I'm still going to, you know, work with him. We're going to try to get the information out that we can. Same thing with, Caleb over there. I don't align completely with his ideology, but still, I'm going to, work with him, have him on my shows, talk about it. And I'm also going to blast this information every time it happens. And that's why we have to have these group chats, different platforms, use every single resource we can to plaster and get it out there. The truth, the truth, the truth, the truth, the truth. This happened, the PayPal situation with a good friend of ours, Ryan Christian, the last American vagabond. It happened almost 2.5 years, 3 years ago. And as we were getting out a lot of information and trying to blast as much as we can, there were a bunch of leftists, Nick, if we should say, that wouldn't share that information, that wouldn't talk about the things he talked about because they didn't agree with him ideology-wise. We got to put our petty differences aside. We know who we are now, and we have to share our information, share each other's platforms, get on, talk, conversate. We got to scream for the rooftops until everybody starts realizing what's going on and eventually, pushes back against this fascist, crazy state.
Well, I want to say something because, this Nina Jackowitz, is that how you say her last name? Jackowitz? Am I saying it right? Jackowitz, right?
Oh, I thought it was Jack Ashowitz. Jack Ashowitz.
There you go. But, she said one thing, which is that, the way she put it, the quote from her is like, in order to stop this free speech attitude, it's about protecting marginalized communities. And that is such bullshit because if you looked at the history of the United States, if it wasn't for efforts that were heavily tied to Russia, to China, to Cuba, to anti-imperialist countries, the liberation struggle of Black people in the United States would not have advanced the way it did. You can Google William L. Patterson. In the middle of McCarthyism at the time, when Jim Crow segregation was still in effect in the South, the Soviet Union gave a platform to William L. Patterson, an African-American communist at the United Nations. And they brought him to the UN, and he gave a report called We Charge Genocide. And before the entire world, he accused the U.S. government of genocide against Black people. He talked about lynching. He talked about lack of access to medical care. He talked about lack of voting rights. He talked about all of this before the entire world. And then members of the Communist Party of the United States, they went and they printed like the booklet, We Charge Genocide. And they sent it all over the country on every corner in Chicago, every corner in New York City and San Francisco and Oakland. They were distributing this report from the United Nations. We charge genocide about the crimes against African Americans. And that's an example of this information laundering. That's what Nina's trying to stop. Stuff like that, right? The fact that when Emmett Till was brutally murdered for allegedly whistling at a white woman in 1954, the image of his mutilated body, they showed it in Jet magazine. It was in the African American press. But the Soviet Union took that image and they sent it all over the world. And they said, America says it believes in democracy and freedom. Look what it does to the African-American community. And that had a huge impact. And it was shortly after that you had the Kennedy family and other figures in the Democratic Party say, okay, we're going to start moving against Jim Crow segregation. Robert F. Williams, he was the leader of the NAACP in North Carolina, in Monroe, North Carolina. And he started an armed self-defense group, a Black National Rifle Association, to protect people in North Carolina from the Ku Klux Klan. He got into a shootout with the KKK, and so he had to flee the country because they were going to charge him with murder after this shootout. Where did he go? He went to Cuba and he went to China. And in China, he met with Mao, and Mao even wrote a statement at his request supporting the civil rights movement. And then from Cuba, the Cuban government gave Robert F. Williams a radio program, Radio Free Dixie. And from Cuba, Robert F. Williams was broadcasting revolutionary Black liberation messages. This idea that somehow, shutting down anti-imperialist speech, shutting down media tied to anti-imperialist countries is about protecting marginalized people is such nonsense, because it's the anti-imperialist states like Russia, like China, like Cuba that have been the strongest record of standing with Black freedom fighters, standing with immigrant communities. There's a Black freedom fighter to this day in Cuba, Asada Shakur, right? She was a Black freedom fighter, a member of the Black Liberation Army. She was falsely charged with killing a police officer. She broke out of jail and now she's in Cuba, and the Cuban government says they will never give her back, right? The U.S. government has said many times, we want her to come back and stand trial. And the Cuban government says, over our dead body, we are never going to return her to the United States. And the record of Russia, China, and anti-imperialist countries standing up for marginalized people, supporting the Black liberation movement, supporting the Chicano liberation movement, is a mile long. I mean, and for them to obscure all this history, now they're trying to give American empire this woke makeover, make it sound like the USA is such a human rights conscious, such a friendly place that now not only are we so amazing, but we get to go around invading countries around the world and spreading some of our amazing human rights around the world. You know, in the terms of this propaganda, they're trying to rewrite all of that history and wash away the facts.
Yeah. And Cenk Uygur just said he wants us to fight against Russia because Russia is anti-gay. So that is what progressives do. They use social issues, any social disagreements that they will have with another culture. And some of these I agree with, right? But then they would use that like, oh, they anti-gay, so let's bomb them. Like,
yeah, while they
how's that helping them?
While they give guns and weapons to Saudi Arabia that cuts gay people's heads off, right? You know, in Russia, they have this law that you can't just, distribute they call it homosexual propaganda. You can't like have education about homosexuality in school, right? Well, that's not cool. I think kids should be able to, make their own decisions and learn about these things, but whatever. But that's just about education, right? But in Saudi Arabia, armed by the United States, backed by the United States, they literally cut gay people's heads off. You go to some of these U.S. aligned authoritarian regimes in the Middle East, like Jordan, like Qatar. They take gay people and throw them off of buildings. The USA has no problem selling them weapons and getting their oil. That's pure demagogy and hypocrisy. The USA is not concerned about gay people in Russia. And let me add, one of the places that comes up with the thing about gay people in Russia is Chechnya, right? Chechnya is a part of Russia that's historically very Muslim, right? And so the people there are very religious and very Muslim. For a long time, the narrative about Russia wasn't that gay people were being oppressed in Chechnya. It was the opposite. It was that big Christian Russia was trying to repress the rights of Muslims, and it was forcing their Christian and more Western and more European culture on these innocent Muslims. There was an Islamic insurgency in Chechnya that was backed by Saudi Arabia and the United States. Well, now that's over, right? They've made a deal. The Chechens are very friendly to Russia, et cetera. So now they've reversed it. Now Russia's not violating the right of Chechens to be traditional and conservative and Islamic. Now they're allowing, conservative Muslims in the government to oppress gay people. No matter what, they're just looking for something to use. That's what you need to take out of that narrative. I've been to Russia. There are gay nightclubs in Russia.
I was going to say that.
There's a huge gay scene in St. Petersburg, a huge gay scene in Moscow. Yes, your typical Russian is socially conservative. They're Eastern Orthodox Christians. They're not okay with gay marriage. They're not okay with that kind of thing. But that's true for most of the developing world. That's true for most of the United States. Most of this country are red states. And if you ask your average person in a red state, are you personally okay with gay marriage? They're going to say no. Right? That's just a reality. Now, does that mean that here in the United States, we round up gay people and put them in concentration camps? Of course not. It just means that a lot of people in the United States are not okay with that kind of thing. Well, I'm okay with that kind of thing. I think gay marriage should be legal. I'm for, full rights for the gay people, for trans people, etc. But at the same time, I recognize that is not, an issue that I support the Pentagon going around the world and attacking countries on the basis of.
Yeah, that's not hard. That's not a hard concept to grasp. And I know that you probably got head out here soon, Pasta. So.
Yeah, I wanted to just say something too about what Caleb said, because yes, I was going to mention that, my friend Mark Sloboda told me there are gay clubs in Moscow right now. They just want to make sure that the children, there's no gay parades, whatnot. It's not part of the education, which once again, I don't hold that against them. And I believe, honestly, I've gone around this country, when I was following a lot of elections, I spoke to a lot of conservative people. They don't even care about the gay issue. Really, to tell you the truth, they just don't want it in their schools. They don't want their children to be taught, sex education in school. And you can argue that point one way or another. And some would argue the fact that since they opened the door a little bit, it's gotten way out of hand. But that's the God's honest truth, is that a lot of conservatives, they really don't even care. What you do as an adult is your business. And that's how they feel. So, the fact is that we're pushing this against Russia. And a lot of people feel that we're fighting against, an anti-gay Thanos Putin guy who's just so evil. It's just ridiculous.
Well, again, I think this is all a distraction. Right? Let's go back to they're basically distracting us with all of it while they're taking away our civil liberties, just in bits and chunks. And I think, you've all made the point earlier that we're living in an oligarchy. It doesn't matter if you're red or blue. This is, red team, blue team. They're both doing the same thing, right? They're pulling away the rights. So, the Ministry of Truth, what is their next action? What I want to know is, what is their action plan? It's starting with just suppressing and silencing and deplatforming, demonetizing. But are we going to be looking at than indicting, because Homeland Security indicts, like they go after criminals. So they're criminalizing speech. So it's more than just losing free speech. They're criminalizing it. That's the distinction. I don't think, most people realize that's what we're heading towards.
Yeah, that's really a great point. So I want to get you back in here, Pasta, and any final words. I know y'all probably get out here very soon.
Yeah, I just
appreciate you joining the Anti-Imperialist Summit, because you guys do great work on the comic, especially on this topic. So I definitely want to get you guys involved. So thank you for joining us. Any last words? Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I just want to say, guys, go out there, share Caleb's stuff right now. Get that tweet he has over there. I made a tweet yesterday. I thought it was really coincidental that the day after Mint Press and Caleb get their PayPal taken down, we get this talk of this new free speech commission out there. I don't know, guys. Is it coincidental or what? But it's a little fishy to me. And the Great Purge is not over yet. They used the COVID situation to take away people's civil liberties. And, I want to give a big ups to Tara talking about our civil liberties. That's important. I love the fact that you talk about that. Tara's got a lot of great new shows out there, too, as well. Our team might have been shut down, but we're still here. None of us are going to back down. And if you get a chance to go check out Caleb's stuff, please do. I've had the honor to not only call him a friend, but have great conversations with him and do great work in the Global South. And finally, Nick, I think you are amazing at what you do. You're more than just one of the co-hosts of RBN. I think you're the guy behind the guy who made this happen. You're a great producer as well. And I look forward to more collaborations, even on things we disagree with, because I think that's the important thing, is if we can talk to each other like adults, across different party lines and whatnot. That's going to be beneficial to people fighting back the empire that needs to go.
Absolutely, man. Well said. And obviously, we are friends of the Convo Couch, and we got to have you back on, man. There's so much we have to talk about. Yeah. So thank you for coming on.
I'm putting together another panel, and tell JB Font to get ready, because this is going to be a good one. I told him the reparations panel is coming, and I got some big names. So I'm looking forward to it. So your outlet will be hearing from me very shortly.
Yeah, that should be a fun one. That should be fun.
Let's
do it. So,
bye guys.
Always good to talk to Pasta.
Bye, Caleb. Bye, Tara. Bye, Nick. I love you guys.
Good to see you, Pasta.
Stay vigilant.
Absolutely. So, the main topic of this panel, and I actually covered this story a little bit, and I actually want to get Caleb Maupin's and Tar's thought on this story, because we saw how the media is cracking down on all dissonance, and they are using it under the guise of fighting misinformation, right? So I can't think of anyone better to ask this than Caleb, and then I want to move on to the next part of this, because I don't know if you saw the story. They are still pushing the Ghost of Kiev. Bullshit. So I don't know if you saw this, and I want to get your opinion. I asked Jimmy's and Pasta's response, but I had to ask both of you guys this as well. And you guys can also talk, especially Caleb. I know you really plugged in on this issue. You can explain why this is bullshit. But now my theory, this is published today. So now this is shit lives. We're like, this guy, he's a hero. He died. He was a Ghost of Kiev who shot down all these Russian planes. Right? How many they said he damn, this is not the one that said how many he killed, but it's like some ridiculous number of how many Russian planes that he shot down. So you guys see who the biggest purveyor of misinformation? And by the way, you see in the headline, their sources, the Ukrainian media.
Yeah.
According to the Ukrainian media. And when you hear that, you might as well throw that away. You already know Zelensky banned all opposition outlets. It pretty much just straight up propaganda for Zelensky and his cause. I'm gonna get Caleb in there. I know you guys probably got a lot to say. What's your thoughts after seeing that? What's your reaction?
Well, we really have no idea how much just straight up lying American media does. When I was in college, my college invited a guest speaker who is Bruce Cummings, who is the most respected scholar of Korean history in the United States. And he spent a lot of time researching Korea, North Korea, and South Korea. And I asked him, I said, what about all this stuff in American media that Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un has, 500 concubines and the world's largest collection of porn and all of this? And he said, none of that has any basis in fact. And he said he frequently gets calls from ABC and NBC, and they'll want to confirm a story like that, or that Kim Jong-il, ate his brother alive for dinner, or all of this stuff. And he said they will frequently call him, since he's the top scholar of Korean studies in the United States. They will call him and say, is this stuff true? Can we confirm this? And he'll say, no, I can't confirm it. And then he'll ask them what their source is. And they'll say, oh, it's someone in the South Korean military. But then you'll read it in the New York Daily News. You'll read it on the New York Times. They'll reference it on American TV, and they will repeat cockamamie, bullshit, half-truths about North Korea that are outrageous. And, you know, and it just gets treated as fact. And if you bring it up, if you in the United States say, hey, how do you know it's true that Kim Jong-il has the world's largest collection of pornography? They don't let Americans go there. I mean, have you seen this collection of pornography that Kim Jong-il has? What do they immediately say? They say, oh, are you defending a mass murdering dictator? And so, you know, they just shut down. And that's how they do this, right? And so there's all kinds of fake news out there. And that's how all of this works. And so, you know, when it comes to this Ghost of Kiev, this was fake news. It was a fucking video game, wasn't it? I mean, it was a video game, right? So now it's been debunked. All right. So now they found somebody who was a fighter pilot who did die and did have some good numbers. So now they're floating him out there and saying, hey, you know, that story we completely lied to you about to begin with, it turned out to be a video game. Well, actually, it might kind of be true, because it's like, give me a break. Give me a break. Give me a break. Right? Give me a break. And you can be sure that that anything similar, from the other side that would go counter to the narrative would be immediately met with criticism, met with cynicism, met with disbelief. There would be immediately people saying, how do you know that? And that's really what Nina is trying to do. Is she's just appealing to people's pro-establishment biases. What she ultimately wants is she wants you to have a voice in the back of your head that when you hear something, when someone says a fact, you think, okay, is this something that might help Russia? Is this something that might lead me to be critical of the American government? Well, I'm not going to investigate whether it's true. I should just not believe it because of what it sounds like. That's what she's trying to do. And that's really what they depend on, right? And I mean, that was, you talk about the Cold War and McCarthyism and the good old days. That's largely what was there, is you could come out and you could say, hey, black people are being lynched in the South. Hey, the Vietnam War, thousands of people are dying. And a lot of Americans did just have this voice in the back of their head that said, oh, if someone says something like that, they're probably a communist. They're probably working for the enemy. I better not believe it. But then over the course of the 1960s and over the course, especially of the information revolution and the access to internet, millions of Americans don't think that way anymore. And if someone says, hey, maybe Russia, has a reason for intervening in Ukraine, there's millions of Americans that go, okay, I'm going to look into that. I'm going to hear the other side of the story. And that's what scares them. They want that kind of almost, they want basically believing the American government, believing the Pentagon, and believing the American media to be your religion. Religion is a matter of faith, right? No one can prove or disprove the existence of God. No one can prove or disprove, whether the Bible is true. People just have faith, and they want you to have faith in the American government. That's what they want. They want you to engage in thought stopping. So the second you hear something that sounds like it might go contrary to the narrative that Joe Biden is giving you, you immediately go, up, that's from the enemy. I better not think. That's what they're trying to do to you. And you should say no. You should say, no, I'm not going to let you do that. I will fight for my own mind. I will demand my right to think as I want, right? I mean, you're fighting for yourself. It's not about me. It's not about Russia. It's not about, the working class and the capitalist class. At the end of the day, it's just about your dignity as an individual.
There's so many good things you said. And before I get Tara reading here, one thing in particular, because I ran a few segments with my friends debunking the lies about the DPRK. So I'm glad that you spoke up about that, because a lot of people are afraid to talk about that issue, because there's like the psychology of imperialism that we talk about on the International Elections Coalition with Dr. Kareem Batesh and Dr. Peter Beattie, on why do Americans just believe anything, especially when you look at Asian countries and Black countries. You can tell the average American that in Kenya they have government sanctioned sacrifices, and they're like, "Oh, damn, that's crazy," because the psychology of that is they believe that non-white Western societies are inherently savage. So right. You can say shit that doesn't make any sense. So I remember hearing this growing up, and this was completely bullshit that my friend, who's very knowledgeable about the DPRK, told me. They would say people in DPRK, they believe that Kim Jong-il doesn't take a shit. Like, they wanted to make up shit that they're like, yeah, they believe he's some sort of god who lives forever. He doesn't take, like, that's clearly not true. Right. And then people would just repeat that as fact. Like, that's been repeated in like the New York Times, Washington Post. Yeah, they believe, they worship him. They believe he's a god who doesn't take a shit. And it's like, the only reason you guys believe that, because you guys inherently believe they're savages for whatever reason. You gotta get, if you believe that shit, you gotta get that checked out. So
yeah, well, let me just say this: the Wilson Center that Nina used to work for, They actually published a report about all the support North Korea gave to the Black Panthers. And that gets totally glossed over in our media. They don't show that in the movies about the Black Panthers. But North Korea, the Wilson Center themselves, Nina's former bosses, did a whole report about how North Korea gave money to the Black Panthers. North Korea welcomed delegations for the Black Panthers. Eldridge Cleaver, when he was fleeing the American government, he lived in North Korea. And that's, again, getting to the essence of what Nina's talking about. They don't like the fact that people that are trying to break free from American imperialism around the world are aligning with people here at home that are trying to break free from the same empire. That's what this whole thing is about. And that's what Nina is getting at.
And before I get to Arnie, I want to explain one more thing on DPRK, because my friend taught me a lot about this issue. And Americans have no idea what that country is like at all. So there is a story. For one, they eradicate homelessness, right? So we got this giant homelessness population. They don't have a homelessness problem in the DPRK. So there's also another story I want to share with you guys. So they have massive peach farms. They grow a ton of peaches every year. There was one year on record in which they grew too many peaches. There was like a massive surplus in peaches. Now think about, what do we do in this country when there's a massive surplus of food? We throw it away because we don't want to drive down the cost of food, right? So they had this massive peach surplus, and you want to know what their government did? They just start giving it out to people. They use that to feed their people. And you guys gotta understand, it is tough over there, but this is because, as I explained before, the capitalism has crushed any alternative, and they put the DPRK under massive amount of sanctions. They sanctioned their country to death, and they're like, oh, look how they're struggling over there. Yeah. Right? And then they say, oh, we need to bomb this country to save the people that we are sanctioning. It doesn't even make sense at face value. And they'll have people tour the DPRK, and this is another piece of propaganda they get people to just inherently believe. Well, they say some people, they will go to DPRK and they realize that everything they was told is bullshit. So you want to know what the Western response to that is? They said, well, they just set up these fake cities. They set up these fake like, do you guys understand the optics of what it would mean to set up fake cities and fake neighborhoods whenever they had tourism? And people just repeat that as fact in America. Yeah, I know it may look good in North Korea, but that's because it's all fake. Do you guys know what that would mean? Sorry, I know you want to chime in, Caleb, and I'm gonna get her back in there soon. Well, but go ahead.
Let me say this. First of all, what do you think the American government does when it brings people from all over the world to the United States, but they only see Manhattan? They only go to Harvard, and they, you think that these international friends of the United States who come, you think they're going to Montana? Do you think they're going to Alabama? Do you think they're going to working class neighborhoods in the Bronx? Do you think that they're going to Ohio and Pennsylvania? You think they're seeing the Rust Belt? Of course not. The college system of the United States, specifically the Ivy League schools, is a lot about bringing people from around the world to the United States and cultivating this illusion that the United States is very prosperous, that we're very, woke and socially aware, that there's no racism here. And I'm sorry, I live in Brooklyn now, and I'll tell you that Brooklyn, and especially Manhattan, is definitely different from the rest of the United States. So I think that sounds like what the United States does for people around the world. And if you watch American media, 90% of the time you're either seeing Southern California or New York City. And this country's way bigger than that. And with social media, with Real Housewives of New Jersey and all of this, around the world, people have a false image of the United States. The other thing, though, is I don't want people to misunderstand this. There's probably somebody watching this now and is like, okay, come on. You guys really think North Korea is not an authoritarian regime? No, North Korea is a very authoritarian society. We shouldn't pretend that they have the level of free speech that we have here. They don't. They don't have the same level of freedom of assembly, right? But that's because they're under attack. Right. And that North Korea is a very rigid society. They have had to militarize the country, but that's because they're under attack and because they're fighting for their lives. After the fall of the Soviet Union, at that point, the United States did what it has done to Venezuela, what it's doing to countries around the world now, and it used food as a weapon. Right. And North Korea is mainly mountainous, so they don't have very much farmland. They were food self-sufficient, but they needed oil for their tractors. So the U.S. government maneuvered to make sure that nobody could sell oil to North Korea. And so they couldn't put oil in their tractors, and their food system came to a grinding halt. And 4 million people starved to death in the 1990s in North Korea because of US government policy. And so at that point, North Korea is saying, wow, you're killing our people like this. We're going to get nuclear weapons to make sure you don't invade us. So they started making noise like they might get nuclear weapons. So then Bill Clinton promised them that if they didn't get nuclear weapons, he would give them all this fuel, all this oil, all this food, he would help them get peaceful nuclear energy. And they made a deal, and Bill Clinton gave them a little bit, and then the US Congress just didn't fund it. And so they didn't get it. And North Korea was waiting. They're like, wait a second. We agreed to not get nuclear weapons in exchange for you giving us oil, giving us heating gas, giving us food, and you're not doing it. You gave us a little bit, and now you're not doing it. And so North Korea waited, and they waited, and they waited. And then George W. Bush gave his Axis of Evil speech and basically announced that the USA wanted to overthrow North Korea. And at that point, they're like, okay, fine. If you're coming for us, we're going to get nuclear weapons. And that's why North Korea withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and developed nuclear weapons. So, what they have been through, any society that has been subject to that many attacks and that much, subversion and is living under the gun of the United States that much, when you have millions of people starving to death with the US government using food as a weapon, at that point, they're not going to be fooling around, right? It's going to be a very rigid authoritarian society. But that doesn't mean that every bit of fake news they give us about it is true. And we got to be clear about that, because there's people, the way that they have people programmed is the second we start saying, oh, they're lying about North Korea, someone goes, oh, come on, and that's how they've programmed us. They've got us this black and white thinking. The world is not black and white. A lot of things are very nuanced. There are shades of gray. And yes, North Korea is a very authoritarian society, but it's like that because of the United States.
Yeah, and what's very interesting, and we can do a whole show on DPRK, because I always interested in debunking Western propaganda. I want to get Tara in here. One last, no, actually, we should probably move on.
Yeah,
we can do a whole show on fucking DPRK. So I'm gonna get Tara in here, because the original, what we brought up originally before we went on a whole tangent, was about the ghost in Kiev and misinformation. You can chime in on anything we were discussing, but that was a general aspect.
Well, I wanted to go back to what Caleb and you were pointing out about, the ghost of Kiev and all that. When it came to light that some of these stories were absolutely false, right? The New York Times did an article. I don't know if anyone remembers it because it was a month ago, but so now the news cycle is moving so fast. But they basically gave the excuse that the false flag stories or the absolutely false, exaggerated stories out of Ukraine about atrocities was actually to boost morale, that we needed those stories to boost morale. So it was like basically saying, well, Western propaganda is okay. These lies are okay because, and again, it's just serving the weapons manufacturers like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, who, is involved too, of just, basically they're trying to get as much profits as they can. And what you're seeing is this continuation of tension and of aggression of, and just like, I think it was a day or two ago, one of the headlines of one of the mainstream medias was that Russia was saber rattling about nuclear weapons. No, they weren't. America was. And in fact, a US senator a month and a half ago was threatening to even want to assassinate the president of Russia, which so this violent rhetoric is leading us kind of, in this sleepwalking way down to World War III, if we're not careful. And that's where, we need to talk about like what we're doing. But I think it was just stunning how that misinformation was then called a morale booster,
Well said. So we got, I know we have another panel scheduled in like 15 minutes. I'm not sure where, I'm going to see where they do it on time. But I definitely want to ask you guys about this. And this is also can be a part of the Ukraine-Russian discussion, because I've been tracking this story, because we all know what this whole Ukraine-Russian war is about. It's about the West fight for U.S. hegemony, the expansion of NATO, and the funneling of weapons to enrich weapon defense contractors. That's what it's about. We all knew what Russia's red line was to stop the eastward expansion of NATO. And we played the clip. I don't know if you saw it, Caleb, but before you joined, with the NFL draft, right, when they were doing Russia-Ukraine propaganda. And this is a coordinated move by the West to mislead people what this war is about. They don't even know that this war is about Russia wanting a neutral Ukraine, which if you know the history of the event, you guys can chime in more on this. It makes 100% sense in terms of Russia's position that you don't want fucking Nazis armed who are openly hostile to Russia, including banning the Russian language. So during this whole propaganda at the NFL draft, they were pretending they fight for freedom, right? Now it's all about stopping NATO. You got people fighting. You got people sending billions of weapons to continue the eastward expansion of NATO. And especially as a black person, as a colonized person, we all should be calling for the abolishment of NATO. Yep. So I am biased. I admit, you guys, I got a vested interest in halting NATO and shrinking NATO at all costs. If you're black, if you're colonized, if you're on the left, if you're a socialist, anyone, we should have a vested interest in fighting NATO. Now, I'm saying this story up for this reason, because the West and the United States is trying to extend this war the best they can. Joe Biden just sent $33 billion more in aid. He's trying to get approved. So we all know Russia hardline is NATO. You have Sweden and Finland who is now teasing joining NATO. And I'm showing you Russia's warning first because they all know what Russia's position is. Stop the expansion of NATO. They even said, hey, we even be willing to use nuclear weapons if you guys don't stop with the NATO expansion. So despite this, these two quote unquote progressive female leaders from Sweden and Finland that was celebrated, now they are pushing for World War III. Look, Finland and Sweden, they are literally seeking NATO membership, and particularly in Sweden, they've been running a ton of pro-war, pro-NATO propaganda, despite the fact that the country is split. Democracy Now! Actually did a great segment where they had someone who's anti-war in Sweden that was explaining how there's nothing but nonstop NATO propaganda, despite there's an anti-war movement in Sweden that's on the left that is advocating against it. And you want to know why Sweden and Finland is saying they should join NATO? Because they want security assurances against Russia just in case Russia invades, which is nonsense. Why would Russia invade Finland and Sweden? Also, this is also nonsense because they already get security assurances as a member of the EU. So this move is completely irrelevant. It's literally just done to provoke Russia. Now, the last story I want to share before I give you guys thoughts. Now, check this one out. As I said, the United States want to escalate this conflict. They don't want peace. Because if they want peace, why would they advocate for this? The U.S. will strongly support NATO membership for Finland and Sweden. People don't know why this war even been fought. So I'm going to start with Caleb Mungo. Tara, what's your reaction to this? The West's insistence on expanding NATO despite raising threats of World War III and nuclear threats. So what's your take on that? What I get right, what I get wrong? What's your general thoughts on that, Caleb?
I just keep flashing back to Rosa Luxemburg. Rosa Luxemburg wrote a really good pamphlet called the Junius pamphlet. And she was living in Germany in like 1914. And it was about how World War I started. And basically what happened was, you have two big, superpowers that are, attacking each other. But you see, it's not like the big corporations in Germany or the corporations in Britain. They weren't the ones that were actually doing it. It was their politicians. And so the politicians are all trying to one-up each other. Well, I hate the Germans. Yeah, well, I super hate the Germans. Yeah, well, I super duper hate the Germans. And this leads to a situation, and that's what's happening now. The reason World War I broke out, nobody intended for World War I to happen. But there was an intention on the part of the Americans, the British, and the French, and the Germans, and the Austrians, and the Ottoman, the Turkish Empire. There was an intention to escalate, to push. And the two sides, you had people that were trying to get points with their boss by being the guy who pushed it further. And somebody else would try to outdo them and be the guy to push it further. And one thing led to another, and suddenly 20 million people died in Europe because World War I broke out. And nobody planned for that. There was no corporation sitting there plotting to have World War I. But when you create an atmosphere where people get rewarded for how far they get to the edge. I mean, it's like, I don't know if you ever seen, there's an old classic 1950s movie called Rebel Without a Cause, starring James Dean, where there's a chicken race. And these two guys, they have cars and they're driving close to a cliff. and the first guy who stops loses, right? That's the idea. So whoever gets closest to the cliff without stopping wins, right? I mean, that's what they're doing here. It's like how you get points in Washington, you get points in Brussels if you push this further. And so now, we got this threat of new countries to join NATO. We got people calling for the assassination of the Russian president on the floor of Congress. If you keep pushing it for this long, eventually we're going to have World War III. And they've created an atmosphere where people don't get any points for saying, slow down. People don't get any points for saying, hold up, let's stop. They don't get any points for that. And that's really, really dangerous. And we need people to take responsibility for the future of mankind and say, look, maybe I don't agree with Russia. Maybe I don't agree with China or whatever, but this is dangerous. Slow down, stop. We had that during the Cold War. There was a peace movement in the United States that, when Reagan would be escalating the arms race, then you'd have, some liberal would get on TV and say, well, we don't approve of Russia, but we must slow down. This is a dangerous escalation. We don't have that now. And that's terrifying. There's no adults in the room here. And so we have people pushing it, getting as close to that cliff as they possibly can. And that's very disturbing.
What's that, Tara? You want to add anything?
That was very well said, Caleb. And to that point, they're taking us to this brink, right? But it's also to excuse all the money that's being spent, of course, on weaponry. And also to excuse that the American military is going to go into those countries like Finland and Sweden and build up arms right on the Russian border, and again aggravate that situation. So where is this going to go? And that is the biggest question right now. What is their end game? What is the plan? And I think you're right. It's like a global game of chicken, and everyone will lose. Everyone will lose. There's no winners. So I just think that it's been a stunning, and as far as like the United States and their role in this, I think that NATO has never been, and there's all of this propaganda about how NATO is a peacekeeping force. Well, it's not. And remember, as far as Caleb, you mentioned the peace movement. Well, the peace movement now, they were out marching to, close the sky, or like the fly zones, close the fly zones, which would ignite World War III. So you had the actual peace activists with those, that were kind of considered moderate Democrats or whatever, that were out there marching to do that, to have the no-fly zone, not knowing what it really meant, that it meant shooting down Russian planes, which would ignite World War III. Or maybe they did know what it meant. I don't know. Give me your opinion on that.
Yeah, the Associated Press mislabeled the huge, no-fly zone rally in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. They reported on it as a peace rally. And that is, you're calling for no-fly zone. That is not peace. No. But I will say, Code Pink, they were out in the streets with a real peace march saying de-escalate, and they are critical of Russia, but they also want to de-escalate. And the Center for Political Innovation, we've had several rallies, in the United States and around the country, and we've had literature tables in D.C. and in New York and other places. And the reaction that we've gotten, when we go out and say, look, Russia's not our enemy, the Wall Street NATO fascists are, a lot of people agree with us. A lot of people are open to hearing it. They weren't a few weeks ago. They weren't maybe even a month ago. But people are more open to this than ever before. And it's such a wide variety of people who are open to hearing it. That's what's also amazing. I mean, it's just,
like I have a question about that. Have you noticed, or is it my imagination, that the yellow and blue kind of the virtue signaling we've been seeing on social media, those flags have been disappearing off those bios? Have you noticed that? Less.
I think because we saw the Ukraine flag in that new psyop that turned up around the same time everyone started banning K-Hive. So I think that was like a Democratic troll farm, because you see these same people. They would be like they would like post like Biden 2024 and shit like that. So maybe after Elon bought them out, they canceled the troll farm. I don't know. But they do have some of the absolute worst takes. But go ahead, Kayla. I think you want to chime in, right?
Well, I have to say this, which is okay. Put your feelings about Russia and Ukraine aside. About the intervention in the war. Russia is a leading producer. They are the top producer of wheat in the world. And because of this war, they won't be able to export huge amounts of wheat that they export. Ukraine is also a huge wheat producer. They're going to have about a harvest of 50% of what they normally produce. On top of that, Russian fertilizer that is supposed to fertilize crops is not going to be delivered. And a number of countries in Africa, a number of countries in South America, a number of countries, I think India is also, they're not going to get the fertilizer, right? On top of that, there are 6 U.S. states that are projected by the National Weather Service to have droughts and wildfires this summer. And Joe Biden has admitted there is going to be a global food crisis. People are going to be malnourished. And there are going to be malnutrition-related deaths. There's going to be an uptick in malnutrition-related deaths because of this conflict. That's the emergency. Right now, our leaders should be convening a world summit about how to stop this, right? How to stop the food crisis that's about to happen.
Well,
that's
Caleb,
the emergency.
How they stop it is they stop the war. They need to start talking about diplomacy instead of how many more weapons. You know, for the first time in the White House press briefing 2 days ago, a reporter finally said the question, so what does victory look like for the U.S. in how long is this going to go on? And I mean, that hasn't even been asked by reporters. All they've been saying is what kind of, missiles, how many more of these, how much more money. And I think this last 33 billion that was just passed through with like not a blink in the eye, simultaneously saying there was no money for any domestic programs for American citizens. I think that's finally people are like, what? Wait, okay. But it took how many billion total, for us to get there? It took actually 55% of the projected budget for the year that went to defense instead of American citizens. So anyway.
Well said, Tara and Caleb. I appreciate having you guys on the Anti-Imperialist Summit. Before I send you guys off, I'm going to give you guys a quick chance to say any last thoughts. Also, make sure you guys check out both Tara and Caleb. They do great work, and I learned a lot from this community, and I grow through following the work of every single person you see on RBN. We don't invite these people on for no reason. So, Caleb, any last thoughts? And then we go to Tara next, and then anything you want to promote as well.
I'll just try to be brief, but I'm the founder and director of the Center for Political Innovation, and one thing that we try to do is not just focus on what we're against, but what we're for. And, Libya was the top oil producing country in Africa. They had the highest life expectancy in Africa before the NATO bombs destroyed it. But one of the things that Gaddafi did is he built the Great Man-Made River, which is the world's largest irrigation system. And with droughts coming up this summer and wildfires and the danger, to crop output in the United States, imagine if instead of focusing on escalating with Russia, and imagine if instead of having troops all overseas, that Joe Biden brought the troops home. And he brought the U.S. military home and he put them to work building a great man-made river or a great irrigation project in the center of the United States to make sure that the farmlands of the United States, because this is going to be a problem because of global warming. We're going to have more droughts and crop failures and wildfires. But imagine all the military apparatus and might of the United States being put to work irrigating the country. And we at the Center for Political Innovation, we're working on a proposal around doing just that. We're drawing from some of what Roosevelt proposed. We're drawing from other ideas that have been in the works. We are proposing that instead of escalating with Russia and exacerbating this food crisis, that Joe Biden should build what we're going to call the River of Life in the center of America, and hire millions of unemployed people to irrigate the heartland of the United States, to secure the United States from the problematic effects of global warming on crop output. We're working on that proposal. Build the River of Life in the center of the United States. And that's the kind of proposal to show people what the government could do if it was on the side of the people. That's a way to really challenge the narrative. Don't just denounce what we're against, but show what could happen if we had a government of action that fought for working families.
Well said, Kelly. That's great. That's great work. So, Tara, I want to get you in here as well. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to promote?
I just wanted to thank you for having me and having the summit. And it was an honor to be on the panel with you all. And I always learn so much history with Caleb too. He always brings so much to the summits and to the talks. So thank you, Caleb.
And whenever I hear Caleb, I'm like, as a political commentator, I'm like, damn, I got to up my game, man.
I know. Whenever I'm going to be on a panel with Caleb, I'm like, okay, I got to read a couple articles. No, you got to do your homework, right? You got to bring your seats. What I was going to say is we need to really focus on what some of the moves are. Like Caleb said, besides denouncing, we need to provide solution-based not just presenting the problems, but like regarding our freedom of speech and regarding like what's been happening about shutting, demonetizing, and silencing voices. We need to have more summits focused on that. We need freedom of speech. We need to be able to hear the suggestions that can make change. So there needs to be some action related things from citizens about that. And to push back on the formation, we can, as citizens, push back on this governance board. We can reject it, and we should collectively do that. So Misty had mentioned, Misty Winston, who's talking about Assange, right? Yeah, we're talking about doing, some sort of action related, thing regarding that, whether, it be a mass letter or, something to move towards pushing back on the way they're trying to suppress us and suppress our voices.
That's one of the reasons why we had an Anti-Imperialist Summit, because as a network, especially as a network that's only a year old, we're just trying to figure out how we can make the impact the best we can. So what we're doing right now, let's bring the community together. Let's brainstorm. Let's plan action together, which we got a lot planned throughout the next part of this next year. You guys got a lot of stuff. Like after the Anti-Imperialist Summit, man, you guys see the next era of RBN is going to be pretty crazy. So
that's right.
Thank you guys for joining us, Caleb and Tara. I'm going to pop you guys out. Thank you guys for joining us once again. Always great talking to you guys.